Kabilule wa okulu Tenau kishmi Dilukomi hiv Kabilu Steu Tenademi Tebretha Khadatha Dihiv Lakom Wathrabim Dimashle Khatayin.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Pinedo Brothers Podcast. I'm JP. My brother Peter, again, is not able to join us, but he's out for a good reason, learning how to serve our country better. And we're going to try and continue on without him. Before we introduce our special guest today, I want to invite everyone to check out PinedoBrothers.com. We've got a big project in the works that you'll be able to get a sneak peek at there. And I think I'm actually probably going to take that offer down after this week because that project is about to get unveiled to pretty much everyone. So check it out. Okay, now on to our special guest. It is JP the Elder, my father. Dad, thanks for coming on today.
Well, thank you for having me.
It feels a little surreal to be talking to your dad on this podcast.
It seems a little surreal to be doing a podcast.
Well, I wanted to have you on because I wanted to talk about the Bible today. I think that Catholics don't do enough time talking about it. And when you see someone like Jordan Peterson, who is doing, and who you know I'm a great fan of, who's talking so much about why the Bible's important, I wanted to talk about why the Bible's important from a Catholic perspective and what captures our awe, why we spend so much time reading it, why you spend so much time reading it, and what it is that we can gather from it in the short time that we have, that we can impart to our audience. And because it's such a short time and the Bible's so massive, I want to narrow our focus quite a bit into the Gospels, which I think are, from a Catholic perspective, the most important thing of the Bible, and narrow it even more to the Gospel of John. From an artist perspective, that's the most interesting gospel because of how artistic it is. So that's why today is about the Gospel of John. But before we really dive in, could you, if you were trying to convince someone why they should read the Bible, what would you say? Why is it important to read it?
Well, the Bible gives you the heart of our Lord, okay? You know, it's kind of amazing to imagine that God would become man and speak to us in the words of men. I mean, you think about a transcendent God. What time does a transcendent God have to deal with us puny humans? But not only did he deal with us puny humans, he came down and he lived among us. And the thing that's so amazing about the Gospels in particular is it has the actual words of God and in human form. So what is God like? Is he some vengeful individual waiting to step on us like a roach? No. I mean, we get the heart of God telling us that the essence of living is basically counter to everything that seems natural. The essence of living is turning the other cheek. The essence of living is being humble. The essence of living is being meek. Mm-hmm. And as you read the Gospel of John, you just, you can't help but see the great love that Jesus Christ, that God has for us. So to know the heart of God, nothing better than reading the Bible.
You know, that's the reason why I wanted to talk to you about the Bible is because, well, first of all, I should have introduced you're an attorney and a very learned individual who've spent a long time working on learning things. And I think more than any other person that I know, you spent a long time working on learning the Bible, diving into all sorts of obscure sources that is pretty much what a Bible scholar does. And so maybe in another time we could talk about obscure sources, but I wanted to present something that you might not know about, even though you know so many things. So this here little book. I'm not sure you've ever seen it before. Uncle John, your brother, gave it to me before he passed, and it's one of my It's one of my treasures. I don't think of many things as a treasure that I own that are things, but I think of this one as a treasure because it's from it's imprimatur, and I've talked to other people on the podcast about it already. Its imprimatur is from 1899, so it's well over a century old. And in it, for the prayers at Mass, which of course are all for the Tridentine Mass, at the Gospel, they have this prayer that I think really says why Catholics are, and it pretty much says exactly what you just said, but it says it maybe in a slightly different way. If you, with your permission, maybe I can read that portion.
Sure, love to have you.
It is not thy interpreters, O God, who are now to instruct me. It is thy only Son. It is his word I am about to hear. I most gratefully embrace this heavenly doctrine. I stand up to declare in the face of heaven and earth that I will walk faithfully in that way which he hath marked out for me. He tells me that it will avail a man nothing to gain the whole world if he lose his own soul. The sensual, the covetous, the worldly, the libertine, the detractor, and such are as insensible to the miseries of the poor shall have no share in his heavenly kingdom. And that in order to become his disciples, I must take up my cross and follow him. I receive with my whole heart all these sacred maxims. Grant me the grace to put them into practice. For to what purpose should I declare myself thy disciple if I were not to live according to the maxims of thy gospel? And so that you're supposed to say that the idea is you say that prayer whenever the gospel is said, which of course is every Mass for those that don't know, but I'm thinking most of our audience probably is aware of that. So yeah, it's the lifeblood, really. It showed we're supposed to, as Catholics, be out to have a relationship with God, a relationship with Jesus. And if we don't know him, you can't know someone you don't have a relationship. You can't have a relationship with someone that you don't know. And so without that reading who he was, what he did, what he wants us to know, he says what he wants us to know in the Gospels, then you're kind of stuck there. And so the gospel is basically the first place you go for trying to find out about him. And hopefully that it influences some people to want to try and pick it up and read it. I know I need to do a better job of reading more often. I get it. It's sometimes not the most convenient thing to do, to read your Bible, but I'm glad we're doing it now.
Just to give an example of what we're saying now, what's our natural reaction? Somebody does something bad to us. Our natural reaction is to want to get revenge. I mean, that's what we humans first feel. Now, a verse in the Old Testament that's really misunderstood is an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. The concept behind it was more of a limiting concept. It was somebody takes your eye, you don't shoot them and kill them, okay? If somebody insults you, you respond proportionately as opposed to responding with overreaching violence. But then we've got, Jesus telling us that the two greatest commandments are to love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your mind, with all of your soul. Of course, that's from the New Testament. But then, and we also have Jesus telling that the second greatest commandment is like the first, to love your neighbor as yourself. But in John, Jesus even takes it further. Jesus says, love one another as I have loved you. Whoa. God is telling us to love others as he loves us. And what was his love that he had? His love was to die for us, to die for us. So we're not called for an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. We are called to love others enough to die for them. That's the heart of God. That's something that naturally we would never come up with. That's why we read the gospel.
Yeah, there's a lot in the Old Testament that is very natural law. That's something that you can kind of get there. Well, maybe for those that are, I would like to not take anything for granted when we make these podcasts. So the Bible's divided up into the Old Testament and the New Testament. And the Old Testament is where the Israelites mostly, or God is speaking to his people, the Israelites, or before the Israelites, Abraham, and what happened basically prior to the birth of Jesus, and how the prophets constantly were speaking of the Savior that's to come. And there's a lot of natural law in that. There's a lot of things that people could probably get at without, it is supernatural because God is speaking, but you could probably get at a lot of the things in a natural way that, like, don't kill, that sort of thing. The Ten Commandments, for example, are kind of a natural law primer, with some supernatural sprinkled in. But then once you get to the New Testament, you get a lot of things dumped on you. And the New Testament is when Jesus was born and when he lives. It starts off with the four Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And that they tell us about his life. And in his life, he reveals so much that you can't get at without reading this or without knowing this information. And that's an example of them right there.
A lot of things are kind of really, really hard to grasp, and a lot of things had to be revealed over time. And as you go with the Old Testament, you see a lot of things slowly being revealed. And finally, you get in the New Testament, what is the relationship that God wants to have with us? What is the relationship he wants? Well, the idea that we would be children, sons and daughters of God, that is an idea that, maybe for us, it's not so foreign, but it's hard to imagine this filial relationship with a transcendent God. And the Old Testament kind of brings us closer and closer and closer to that until Jesus drives it home by speaking of God as being our Father.
Yeah. And that right there is one thing that kind of, I need to correct my statement quite a bit when you point out the fact that in the Old Testament, God reveals that he's interested in us. I think you can, through natural means, know that God exists without, any revealed truth. You look at the world around you and you think, well, how did this come to be? How did I come to be? How am I thinking? How can I think? How did I come to be? There's a lot of things that eventually you get to a point where, well, if you keep asking questions and you keep going deeper, then you're like, there has to be some sort of uncaused cause. But it is singular, incredibly singular, that not only does that uncaused cause give himself a name like he does to Moses, he also says, I'm interested in you. He bends down and says, I am your God, and I'm here, and I want you to know that I'm here. That sort of incredible power that being would have, it doesn't come naturally that we should think that being would be in love with us, that being would have interest in us. So maybe that's one of the big revelations of the Old Testament. I'm not sure. What do you think?
Oh, I would agree with that completely. A lot of people think of God as the great watchmaker. He made everything and then just sat back and let it happen on its own. Why should a transcendent God have any interest in me whatsoever? Well, he's got more interest in me than you're my son. So I love you as my son. But in a sense, the father-son relationship is just an analogy of the relationship that God has with us. Why should God look upon us as his children? But yet he does. And that's not something that we could have ever figured out on our own, that he wants to take us and embrace us and love us as his child. That's something that we had to learn through the Gospels, and that's something that took a long, long while for people to kind of accept. At one point, it was looked upon as the Jews as being God's special people. So then at that point, you got the sense that you had a God who cared about a community. Well, it took us a long while to come further than that. God just doesn't care only about the community. He cares about each and every individual person within that community.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's a hard thing why should he care about us puny people?
Right.
Why should he care about 7 billion people? But he does.
Yeah. Especially now, science seems to be saying that we are not worth caring for. We're just viruses. We're just ants on a tiny rock that's made up of that makes millions of other rocks up that are floating out in space. the Christian message is one, like when you get the message that a lot of scientists are spouting these days, which they make for great movie villains. And I have put them into my movie scripts, the things that actual scientists say. But for just for things that people follow because, oh, you're a smart scientist. Well, there's no reason why suicide rates are going up, why there's so much despair. You find reasons not to despair in reading the Bible. Tell me a little bit more. I want to dive into John, but can you give me a kind of a broad overview of the four Gospels and kind of what's different about them, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John?
All right. We'll start off with Matthew. Okay. Matthew is basically the version of the apostles as a whole. Okay. And, I know there's been this revisionist concept that Matthew wasn't written first and stuff like that. Well, the original concept that was believed for the first 1900 years of the church was that Matthew was written around the year 42, 43 AD. And it was written originally in Aramaic, which was the language that Jesus spoke. He didn't speak Hebrew. Hebrew at that time was a dead language, and it made its comeback later on. But I can just see it happening. The apostles say, James just got beheaded. We might not all be around forever. We need to start putting this down in writing. I'm a fisherman, and but Matthew, you're an educated man. You write it down for us. I can just see Matthew saying, yeah, I might be an educated man, but I'm a tax collector. I'm an accountant. I deal with numbers. I'm not a writer. And, they say, well, I'm sorry, Matthew, you got to write it anyway. And of course, if you look at Matthew, you get the whole sense of, you get all these numbers always thrown in, and all the parables are in groups of three and that. I'm not sure I admire all of Matthew's math, because some of Matthew's math I think is a little bit questionable, but you get the sense of somebody that loves math.
He was a tax collector.
Well, he starts off with the genealogy and says 14 generations, 14 generations, 14 generations. And I don't really see that it's 14, 14, and 14. But, that's the kind of thing you would expect a tax collector to do. Here's my first column. Here's my second column. Here's my third column.
And it's questionable math. That's the thing.
Tax collectors of that time weren't known for accuracy. No, sorry, Matthew. But, I always take Matthew as being the account of all of the apostles, okay? Because he was there to talk to all of the apostles. He was living there at that point in Judea when he was writing it. And he, said, okay, most of what he got came from Peter, sure, because Peter was the one who was speaking the most, but he also put in the accounts of the various things that the other ones had to say. Matthew in the early years of the church was used more extensively than the other Gospels. It gives a very vivid, complete picture of Jesus's talking. But Matthew is so much like Mark. Now, the new thing that people like to say is that Mark is the original gospel and that Matthew is just a expansion of it, because Mark has 662 verses, and of those 662 verses, 600 of them are in Matthew. Now, if Matthew is a copy of Mark, whoever did the copying did a lousy job, okay? Because you put the two of them together and you see that Matthew basically rewords everything that Mark has to say. Well, of course they're similar. Mark is Peter's gospel, okay? Mark put down the things that Peter had to say. Peter was in Rome. Mark was there with him. John Mark is his name, and he wrote down Peter's work, whereas Matthew is what everybody had to say. Mark was written after Matthew is. Peter didn't necessarily go into all of the details. Mark didn't make any effort to put everything in any particular type of chronological order. He just put down what Peter had to say. But there's an interesting theme that comes into Matthew and Mark. What are the first words that Jesus says in Matthew and Mark? Repent, for the kingdom of God, one says the kingdom of heaven, is at hand. And that's one of the themes you get throughout those two gospels in particular. Repent, repent, repent. Now we come to Luke, and Luke obviously is something based more on the Pauline theology. Okay, Luke has a different emphasis altogether. Now, when Luke wrote his gospel, he says, many have attempted to write down the events as they happen. I have made a thorough search of them and have set them forth for you, your excellency. Okay. Luke obviously is not the first person to write the gospel. He's more of a historian who goes in and he looks at the other accounts and he sets them out, and he sets them out for a different audience than Matthew does. Matthew is writing in Judea. Luke is trying to do it for a universal audience. But Luke comes more away from the theme of repent, and he has more of a theme of believe in our Lord. The first words that you get Luke talking about are, I've come to announce a year from Jesus. I've come to announce a year of favor from the Lord, where Jesus is reading in Nazareth. It's a whole different emphasis. It's more the Pauline emphasis. Believe in our Lord. Have faith. And then we get to John. Okay. Now, I can go into this whole thing with the chronology of when the Gospels were written. I think, and of course, people recently disputed it. I have a lot of reasons for believing that Matthew was, in fact, written around 42, 43 AD. There's all kinds of things I could say about that. I think it's clear to me that both Mark and Luke were written before the destruction of Jerusalem. Mark must have been written in the 60s. Luke must have been written in the 60s. John was written a long time after it. And John, different people have different ideas of when he died, but people think that John died in the year 104 AD, okay? And he died in Ephesus. All the other, Peter died at 67 or so. James was beheaded in the 40s. John was the youngest of the apostles, and he lived to be a very, very advanced age. John just brims over with love of Jesus Christ, okay? And he brims over with the concept that Jesus is God, with this exalted notion of who God is, who Jesus was. His whole gospel, as opposed to starting off, Matthew of course, starts off with an infancy narrative. Luke starts off with an infancy narrative. Mark, it sounds like that fisherman, that rough and tough fisherman, doesn't care about that infancy baby stuff. Over there, he starts off talking about Jesus's ministry. But John starts off, in the beginning was the Word was in God's presence, and the Word was God. He was present to God in the beginning. Through him, all things came into being, and apart from him, nothing came to be. Whatever came to be in him found life for the light of man. A lot of things with that. One of the humorous things with that is you just look at it, is that's classical Hebrew poetry, okay? Classical Hebrew poetry.
He's an artist.
It states one idea and then it repeats it in different words. You get that all throughout John. It's very, very clear from reading John that it was written by somebody who was Jewish. But he starts off with that Jesus was transcendent, that Jesus existed before the very beginning, that all things were created. This so supreme, I guess the word would be ecclesiology, okay? And, he obviously knows what was written in the previous Gospels, okay? And I get the sense when I read John that John wasn't written as one coherent book, okay? The John was a bunch of stories that John put down that somebody arranged in an order to make it stick together, okay? And you get that sense from several different things, such as, for instance, in the last discourse at the Last Supper, John, there's two different endings to it. And you look at the gospel, there's basically two different endings to the gospel. They say, and I haven't looked this up over here, but they say that of the material in John, 92% of it is independent, and only 8% of it is what is included in the other gospels. I don't know that number is accurate. That's the number that I've seen. But, you look at it, what do you see in John that you find in the other gospels? Well, you see the miracle of the multiplication of the loaves. Of course, John throws in his own particular details that are, the involvement of Andrew in bringing out who has the loaves. But John's reason for bringing that in appears to be different than the reasons of the synoptic gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. John's reasons for bringing that in is because he wants to use it as a prelude to the whole discourse on the bread of life.
Right.
The other thing that you see in John's gospel that is repeated in the other gospels is the passion narrative, okay? And the passion narrative, I think the reason you see the passion narrative in John, even though it's repeated in the others, is because it was so central to John. I mean, it was just so, it was something that he himself had to tell his particular story and put it out of what he saw and what he observed. One of the things that's always curious to me about John is that John has 4 different apparent contradictions between his gospel and the other gospels. Okay. And you would think that if it was recounted in Matthew, Mark, and Luke wasn't true, that you would have all these people writing and saying, this isn't how it happened, that's not what happened. Well, the only thing you've got is John making 4 minor contradictions. One of the contradictions that you get in John is whereas the other gospels say that Simon of Cyrene was pulled into helping Jesus carry the cross, John says Jesus carried the cross by himself.
Right.
Okay?
He makes a point. He doesn't just not mention Simon of Cyrene. He says Jesus carried the cross by himself.
And John, with this exalted notion of Jesus, I mean, he doesn't want him to say anything like his Lord needed help. Okay. Now, if you believe everything in the Gospels is accurate, I mean, how can you reconcile the two of them? Well, John may not have seen everything that happened with Jesus carrying the cross. Let's say that John was there at the beginning and John was there at the end. He didn't necessarily see Simon of Cyrene put into it in between.
Right. And Simon may not have carried the cross the whole way.
The whole thing seems to concept that that Simon was pulled into it somewhere along the route. When the people come to arrest Jesus, and Jesus says, who are you looking for? And they say, Jesus of Nazareth. He says, I am he, in John's gospel. And John has them say that the people who came to arrest him retreated slightly and fell to the ground. I mean, like stumbled to the ground and stuff like that. That's not something that you pick up in any of the other gospels, anything like that. But John is always lifting up his Lord, the one that he loves so very, very much. And he is always exalting his dignity. And so, he's always making a point to show his dignity. This is God. This is my friend. This is my hero. Okay?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a much more childlike view of the Lord, I think, where he's looking very much as like the hero, as a child looks up at his hero.
And it's interesting with John is the details that you find in John that you don't find out in other places. The other gospels say, Peter took a sword and slashed off the ear of the high priest slave. Well, John tells you the high priest slave's name was Malchus. Okay. Somehow John was known to the high priest. You do get that from the other gospels. But he tells you who it was. With the multiplication of the loaves, the other gospels say that, so one of the apostles said, there's a lad here with 5 loaves and 2 fish, but what good is that for such a multitude? John tells you it was Andrew who said that. John gives you the geography of the various places. He talks about the Samaritan woman at the well, and how the Samaritan woman says that our ancestors said to worship on this mountain. Well, the mountain right there is Mount Garrison. And if you're in Sychar, which would be the proper translation of where the well is, you see Mount Garrison there in the background, if you're sitting there. So, you get the geographic thing about where the mountain is. The woman in the gospel, the Samaritan woman says, this well is quite deep. Well, that well is still here to this day, okay? And that well, I've read different accounts of how deep it is. One account said, I think 70 feet. Another account said it was 90 feet, but it was quite deep, okay? So one of the things you get with John is you get the details about some of the locations that these things happened in are woven into his narrative. You get some of the details about some of the individuals who were involved that you don't get in the other gospels. So you get the pouring out of John's love for Jesus. You get the pouring out of John's exalted notion of Jesus. You get the pouring out of the exalted ecclesiology. And you also get all these, so a lot of little human details that are left out from some of the other gospels.
Yeah, and I wanted to return back to that where you wrote it, you said it word for word pretty much, the very opening of John. You left out the last line that I always love. That you didn't forget it. You just didn't keep on going to the last line that I love, that opening where it says, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." Now, just to pair it with the beginning, in case people forgot, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came to be through him, and without him nothing came to be. What came to be through him was life, and this life was the light of the human race. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There's three words that just leap out of the page to me: word, light, and life. You're speaking in a poetic language here, in a poetic tongue, but it's also very literal. It's also very literal that God was the Word. The Word is that which creates light and life. And without the Word, there's just darkness. And darkness is always trying to overcome. In those few lines, you have the whole hero journey, the hero cycle that we talk about so much. You have, Star Wars, Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker. You have the hobbits, marching to Mount Doom to destroy the ring. You have every great story that's ever been told in just a few lines. And here's the great thing: it's real. This is not just a story, even though stories are wonderful and marvelous. But the great stories are stuff that are based on reality, and this is pure reality.
That's a very interesting point over there. We get the familiarity with the story. I'm not sure what version are you reading from exactly?
This is, I think, New American. Yes, the New American.
Is it the Revised New American?
I don't think so. It's pretty old. So, it is revised. It's not that old.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's still pretty old. In the New American, before it was revised, the words were, "The darkness did not overcome it." Okay. And, they both have pretty much the same symbology, but did not overcome it, to me, always envisions what the darkness did try to overcome. And of course, the darkness did try to overcome it. The whole history is kind of fascinating if you can understand what's going on with history. And it seems like the whole thing of history is this celestial warfare, if you will, taking place between the good and the bad. In fact, every moment of our life seems to be a war between the good and the bad with us, between our notion and our desire. We're made in the image of God, our desire to love and to help, and our selfish desires to do what we want to do at the detriment of ourselves and others. Okay. And we always have this clash within us. You see all of history having that clash as well. And the decisive moment of the clash took place with the birth and incarnation of Jesus Christ, where God takes the form of man, and he comes specifically not to do his own will, but to redeem a fallen human race. And the darkness tries to overcome it and does not succeed. Darkness doesn't succeed because the darkness doesn't see the plot twist, doesn't see the twist in the plot. The darkness doesn't see that killing Jesus would not be a victory, but would be a loss. What one would think, okay, we have an opponent. Let's eliminate our opponent. How can we best eliminate our opponent? Let's kill our opponent. They would think that that was a victory, but instead that turns out to be the monumental redemption of the human race. What a darkness miscalculated. And because God was willing to come in the form of man and loved us so much, God was able to change the whole course of human history. Sometimes people say, has Christianity failed? Because we have so many weaknesses in the Christian countries. And of course, every generation is a new generation to be converted. And every generation, there are new attacks. whatever sometimes people say, you think that we're not doing so well in this country over here or in some Christian country? Try going into some country that doesn't have Christianity and compare.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a problem there because you can't get into that country because look, North Korea is dark at night for a reason. It is literally dark if you look at the globe and you don't see lights coming out of it. The Soviet Union collapsed in on itself because it couldn't survive. Let's see how long China manages to survive. I mean, it hasn't been like this iteration of China has not been around that long. The People's Republic of China, I mean. So we'll see. It's definitely, we take a lot for granted here. But I also wanted to, speaking about that one line though, that the very beginning, it doesn't just speak of Jesus being born. It tells us the creation story. In the beginning was the Word. Like that's creation. That's the patriarchy right there. The order of Word being created, or the order of Word allowing creation, allowing order to come. Word speaks. The God speaks. And it's the Word, or God is the Word as well. He is order. He speaks in his capacity as creator, as God, and thus the world is created. It's absolutely awe-inspiring. I mean, you see that one line, and I think of the Silmarillion, where Tolkien's great work, where he writes the creation story, but it's music. And C.S. Lewis would often speak of the Word as music as well, and he speaks of joining the great dance. And I think it all harkens back to John. It all harkens back to how John spoke of God in this artistic way and inspired it's just generations of Christian storytellers. I don't think that they're inspired or as they build upon John in my mind.
I think that John is the only one that uses the word logos or word. I don't think you see it anyplace else in the Bible at all. And what an exalted notion just throughout all. The Word. Mm-hmm. What is the Word? You could spend a lifetime meditating. In the beginning was the Word was in God's presence, and the Word was God. Mm-hmm. The Logos, the Word. What is the Word? The thought. Wow. I mean, what a concept. Mm-hmm. What a concept. And then the Word came to live among us. Mm-hmm. Everything was created through the Word. Wow.
Mm-hmm. Each line is just one revolution after another. It's like the Old Testament maybe is a slow march across time where we're just painfully and slowly gaining knowledge. And then all of a sudden in 5 lines, John destroys not destroys, but just blows up everything, and it goes into the stratosphere in a matter of seconds. It's amazing. Mm-hmm. And then another moment where that happens in John is where you talked about a little bit, the bread of life discourse. Before we get to that, actually, I wanted to, because I feel like the bread of life discourse is going to take up all the time we have left. And I wanted to point out something that was really, it's always interested me. You made a very passionate defense of the established way of understanding how the Gospels, the timeline for how the Gospels were written. Because when the people put the Bible together, they, for a reason, said it's Matthew, Mark, then Luke, then John. Those 4 were the order. And then, since then, we've gotten so smart and so enlightened, and people are like, well, that's not the real order, and that's not. They didn't really know what they were doing, and it's fine. No, it's fine. And I've always found it interesting how you were very passionately looking, and you would research, and you would say you would be able to make very learned defenses like you just did right now. Why is that important?
Well, one of the reasons that people change the whole notion of how the Gospels were written is because I think that they're downplaying the miraculous about it. Okay. People are always trying to make things sound less miraculous than they were. One of the things that people like to say now is that the Gospels were written after the fall of Jerusalem in the year 70 AD. They want to take away that Jesus predicted that Jerusalem would fall. why? I don't know why they would want to do that, other than the fact that they denied that Jesus knew what was coming. The fact of the matter was that the Christians who were in Jerusalem, when they saw the armies of Rome coming up, remembered what Jesus said, and they fled.
Got out.
And I don't recall off the top of my head what the village was that they fled to in the mountains, but they fled to the mountains, and they got out of Jerusalem. They got out of Dodge. Okay. So the whole modern concept is demythologize. I'm stumbling over that word. The Gospels. That just drives me crazy when people do that. You can see the internal evidence. You look at Matthew, and Jesus is walking around in Matthew and saying that when people are admiring the temple, saying that not one stone would be left on another stone. And they asked Matthew, what will be the sign of this happening, and what will be the sign of the end of the world? And you read Jesus's discourse, what he's listed as having said, and it appears to me that Matthew thought the two events were going to be related. The fall of Jerusalem would be related and then would be followed by the end of the world. If you look very carefully at what Jesus had to say, that's not what he said. He didn't say those two events were related. He said, he gave the explanation of the fall of Jerusalem. He gave the explanation of the end of the world. He didn't say that one followed immediately upon the other. Matthew seems to have that misunderstanding, which makes it very clear to me that Matthew must have been written before the fall of Jerusalem, or else he would have realized the two events weren't related.
Right.
You see the various things in Luke. I mean, with Luke, when Luke ends, Paul is still alive. In fact, Paul is in captivity, and it sounds like Paul is going to be released out of captivity. He says Paul remains in captivity for 2 years. He doesn't say in Acts, he doesn't say that Paul's put to death. Well, Paul had two different Roman captivities, and the first one he was released. So you get the idea that Acts must have been written when Paul was in the first Roman captivity. Obviously Luke wouldn't ended off with Paul being in captivity if Paul was killed. Okay.
Well, I wanted to, sorry to cut in, but I want to drive that point home that you said right now, is that there is a movement, and it's very insidious, because it's pretty much within the church. You don't hear it outside the church much, because outside the church, people don't care about the Bible. They're trying to, let's not, why do you come at me talking about the Bible? But it's within the church, and it's a belittling. It's like, oh, you believe those old stories. It's like they're fairy tales. There's a truth to be taken out of them, but it's not real. That sort of thing. You don't actually believe that Jesus, multiplied the loaves. You don't actually believe that, it was Matthew, Mark, then Luke, then John. Because if you believe that, well, then you're not really scientific, And of course, that's all word, like it's a mind game, because true science is actually looking at facts and researching and testing and making, just like you said right now. Well, Matthew would never have said that made that mistake if he had been writing after the fall of Jerusalem. So actually, the way that they ordered the Bible does make sense. That whole thing of where you're actually asking questions and then, looking for answers instead of just saying, it's fine, it's fine. And it's the opposite of science, to just push things away and kind of belittle it without actually looking to see if there's anything really there. And that's what you're seeing within the church a lot of the time. And it's a subtle way of destroying the faith of the faithful, where they don't actually believe in what they're hearing from the Gospels anymore, from their readings anymore. We're kind of discouraged to actually take this to heart and realize that this is actually has a bearing on my life.
Yeah. And you get it from a lot of different sources. I've heard people say that the reason that Jesus was able to walk on the water was because the Sea of Tiberias or Sea of Galilee, I forget which one it was, froze over, which would have been quite a miracle all by itself.
That would have been a miracle, absolutely. I've been in the Middle East, and they have no seas freezing over there.
I heard somebody one time say that, in the multiplication of the loaves, maybe some food was multiplied, but the big thing was that everybody started sharing. Okay, that's not what it says. It says they've been out in the desert for 3 days and they didn't have anything left in one of the accounts. And so, they wanted to send the people home so that they wouldn't be hungry. Well, I heard someone demyth the law. I'm having trouble with it this morning. I guess I need my coffee to say that. But so, they try to debunk the miracle by saying that everybody started sharing. We have a transcendent God.
It's so trite when you say it that way. It's a very trite thing, but this is a magical thing. This isn't, and magic is important. This is Chesterton would write about this quite a bit. This is an incredible import that's happening, and it's a miracle. It's something that is from without this world. We need to pay attention to it, and we need to take it seriously. And that's something that I think Peterson does so well, Jordan Peterson, and that's why he's so popular. Is he takes the Bible seriously. When so many times priests don't take the Bible seriously. It's incredible. I mean, there's many good priests out there, and they take it. They're far more learned than I am, and I have great respect for those that take the learning that they have and actually apply it to their life, and then give us the gift of it. But I've run into many a priest that we only have a few minutes left, and that's terrible because we're talking about one of the greatest miracles of all time, which is the Eucharist. And Jesus speaks about that directly in the bread of life. This is just a couple weeks ago at our parish, someone was minimizing the bread of life discourse, and you hear it all the time. Can you tell me a little bit more about the bread of life discourse?
Well, the whole bread of life discourse is just kind of an amazing thing. Okay. And of course, our Protestant brothers and sisters like to say that he was just speaking symbolically. Well, you read it and you read the whole thing. He's talking about the bread that came down from heaven. And the concept of the bread coming down from heaven is a fascinating concept by itself, because the idea is that Jesus was it's just too much to get into in a short period of time. But the idea was always that God had bread that existed before time that would feed people, okay? And that bread is Jesus Christ. Well, you talk the whole thing where he's saying, and it seems like he's maybe talking symbolically before when he's talking about bread and bread and bread. He could have saved himself a lot of trouble, okay? But he comes to the point where he speaks very, very clearly. And the bread I will give is my flesh for the life of the world. Mm-hmm. Well, nobody would have been angry at him if he'd said, the bread I will give is my teaching. The bread I will give is my spirit. The bread I will give is my way of life. But no, he comes in this remark after he's been talking in this bread of life discourse and says, the bread that I will give is my flesh. He really hammers the point home. And of course, at that point, everybody starts saying, this is crazy. I mean, how can he give us his bread to eat? I mean, this bread, as the prophets say, he was speaking symbolically. And then he goes and he makes it worse, okay?
He doubles down. That's the thing.
Not only does he double down, he introduces a new concept. Mm-hmm. Tell you, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood. He said nothing before about drinking blood, okay?
And imagine the Jews at this time, the Jews that are listening, and Jesus is a Jew. So he's speaking, and he knows exactly what's happening to his audience. They're sick. The idea of drinking blood, that's probably the worst sin that a Jew could commit, is that horror of it. And he knows exactly what he's saying. They're sick.
Sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
You didn't even eat flesh with blood in it. You had to drain out all the blood from the flesh. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no. So he doesn't stop him. This is so important that he needs everyone to know this is real, guys. My flesh is real food and my blood is real drink. And if you don't drink it, you will not have life within you. That is absolutely, it shatters everything that the Jews had thought at the time. And yet it's so important that he says it.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing.
But why is it so important? That's the question.
Why is it so important? Because there's old concept, you are what you eat, okay? That's kind of a trite concept to put in this. But God loves us so much that he leaves his own flesh and blood to nourish us, to change us, to bring us life. Why is it important? It's important because of what he says right there. I tell you that if you not eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no life in you. For my flesh is real flesh and my blood is real drink. It is something that's transformative, that brings us life. And it's what God has set up to transform us, because we are carnal people. We are natural people. We are people who are inclined towards sin. And it's a sharing of the divine nature with us, giving us a way that we can transform and start becoming like God. Transform our natures. It is what brings us life.
It is what brings us life. It's the understanding of, let's see, how are we doing? Oh, I think you need to run to speaking of the Eucharist, I think you need to run to the Eucharist right now.
Yes, I'd like to revisit that topic sometime. I think I did not as good of a response as I would like to, but let's revisit it sometime.
Well, we should have a whole podcast on the Bread of Life discourse, I think, because we could easily talk an hour about that.
Yeah, we could also easily talk for an hour about the logos. Let's rejoin again.
That sounds good. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Enjoy talking to you. God bless you.
God bless. Folks, sorry so much about that that quick ending. We'll come back. We'll talk about this hopefully very soon. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Pinedo Brothers Podcast, an artist podcast for Catholics. We hope you enjoyed it, and if so, please consider subscribing, and commenting below. That really helps. This episode was edited and recorded by me, JP. Makeup was done by no one, if you couldn't tell. The Pinedo Brothers are Catholic filmmaking brothers working to revitalize the world of Catholic art through film. For more information on us, check us out at pinedobrothers.com. Thanks again.